I'm Francis Seeley from Enfield Climate Action Forum, and recently we had a forum meeting where we had a number of really good speakers. And what we were trying to look at was microcredit. Now, microcredit is a system that's been set up, particularly in underdeveloped countries and now spreading across the world, to help poorer people and impoverished communities. And we thought this sort of system might be useful in Enfield and other parts of the UK where there is growing evidence of poverty. So we invited Professor Olga Biosca, who is from the Yunus Centre in Caledonian University in Glasgow, to talk to us about that. And the first thing we asked her was, what is microcredit?
Muhammad Yunus, in the 70s, more or less, started making small loans to people. He was a professor in an American university, but he was Bangladeshi in origin. And he went back to Bangladesh and thought about ways in which he could help people. The origins of microcredit as such are very tied onto entrepreneurship. So his form of microlending was usually related to set up a business, self-employment. We're not talking about small business, we're talking about micro business or somebody doing an economic activity. So that's how it started. Then Muhammad Yunus went and won the Nobel Peace Prize for precisely this Grameen Bank, which has millions of borrowers now and belongs to the woman. Most of the people he lent to, the financially excluded in Bangladesh at that time, and also the people who had more trouble in accessing like money for entrepreneurship were the women. So practically 100% of the borrowers that he lent the money to were women. In the concept of microcredit, like it's a small loan to people who cannot access loans from Ministry of Finance at fair interest rates. It doesn't mean it's a low interest rates because actually small loans are very expensive to provide operationally, but it does mean that it's a much better alternative than the ones that are around, i.e. loan sharks. In this case, the loans are short term and they're paid very frequently, very tiny, small amounts. And that's how this type of loan was different. And it helped people repay better with the cash that they were generating from the self-employment or the activity, the economic activity that they chosen. Another big thing that he started doing was he lent to groups. So groups of women that supported each other. And at the beginning, there was this solidarity in which if somebody didn't repay, the other had to repay for them. That has now disappeared of every microcredit program in the world. And what they do now is like they generate support groups, sometimes of people who have similar economic activities, sometimes of people who have different economic activities, and they create this network of entrepreneurs and support each other in times of crisis. So I think there was another important component, which was savings. There was sometimes savings associated to the repayment of the loans, or sometimes because obviously these people are financially excluded, not only in terms of loans, but also in terms of savings. So to generate some savings mechanisms, the microlenders would do that too. So it was it was a holistic development tool. It was understood as such at the time. It has evolved a lot from then, and not only in developing countries, but also in more advanced high-income economies like in the UK. And it serves, I think, different purposes. It's really interesting how it's adapted to the UK.
Sorry for the cutaway shots, but it was a meeting. Well, we carried on talking to Olga and asked her really, what's the focus then of the microcredit movement to address poverty?
Yes, absolutely. So the way in which it started, it was to tackle poverty and to give opportunities to people. So the loan in itself was only a means to an end. It wasn't about the money. It wasn't about financial inclusion. There was a very similar program that started also in the 70s, but in Brazil. It was trialed by a big organization called Acción International, which still exists. And it was to support entrepreneurs who had just been through conflict. So it was a way of regenerating the community, creating trust amongst people in the community, and not only a community network, but also economic activities that would give opportunities.
Olga said that the microcredit movement began in Bangladesh with Muhammad Yunus, but it has spread across the world. And the question is, how applicable is it to developed countries like the United States, like the United Kingdom, like in Europe? How valid is it there? And that's something we put to Olga.
Absolutely. So there was actually there is a branch of Grameen, the Grameen Bank that Yunus started. There is a branch of Grameen Bank in the US. They are very, very big and they serve different purposes. So microcredit is not only about the credit, it's also other financial services. And I think this applies more to the high income countries. So for example, you have insurance, you have micro savings, you have other type of financial services that people who are financially vulnerable or do not have collateral or do not have guarantees, they cannot provide, or even that do not have stable income. And because in the UK and the US, you have these very harsh, I'm going to say, credit scoring systems in which you need to build a credit score. So you need to loan and then pay your debt. But if there are things that you don't have, for example, a utility bill, then you're not able to borrow from the mainstream banks and you need to go to other type of providers. Or if you don't have a stable income coming from employment, for example, it becomes really, really hard. So I think the UK and the US are particularly good countries to have or have proved to be particularly good countries to have microfinance, because there is a high part of the population that is financially excluded and that cannot access mainstream banks.
We asked Yoga to what extent microcredit could be used to help the homeless and the housing crisis. We cited, for example, Lewisham Credit Union, which is working with the University of Sheffield to help private tenants who are facing eviction, and something like 400 families, I think, have been helped this way. To what extent does Olga think that microcredit can be used in the UK to tackle or help tackle some of the housing and the homeless crisis?
So we know that there are I mean, this is a situation in which we are learning. So the North is learning from the South. So it's an unusual situation where we are learning from low and middle income countries. They do have something called housing loans that are, housing microcredit that is fairly developed. And what they do with those loans is they improve the quality of the housing, because housing is pretty appalling. So they are small loans. They wouldn't be able to buy a house, but what they're able to do is, yes, pay rent if they need to pay rent, or get some appliance that they need, or, clean the house so that there's no mold on it, and small improvements. So I think that is now being piloted in the UK. So this type of, Lewisham's pilot scheme that has proved to be very successful is quite new. So it's something that is being piloted now. Pretty much as we speak. So we haven't started yet doing any research, but we've seen other countries and in other contexts, it has been helpful. Also, don't forget that we all need financial services. I mean, if you don't get a loan from a community development finance institution, which are the microcredit lenders in the UK, you will get a loan from friends and family. But we all need, our income goes up and down, or we all have sudden shocks in expenditure and we need to cover that. And, it's not only applicable to low-income families, it will also be applicable to high-income families. The thing is, like, we have access to other type of financial services.
Although microcredit is used to help individuals to start businesses or when they have social problems, it also benefits the community because those individuals sometimes get together. So we put it again to Olga, to what extent does it help to facilitate community engagement and community cohesion?
Yeah, so that was what it was about. And I think that is the function that it can have in the UK too. It certainly has been the function that it has in Grameen Bank in the US. They have started offering a lot of non-financial services. They have some clients who are immigrants, for example, they cannot access the complicated health system in the US, they have started to work different agents, different power services to create a community of women that are powerful in the end, right? To empower these people to do things.
Clearly, in Enfield Climate Action Forum, we're interested in the climate crisis. So we ask Olga to what extent microcredit can be used to help develop resilience towards the problems we're facing because of climate change.
Well, it's crucial. So Muhammad Yunus has a book, as you will probably know. It's called the Three Zeros. So where he proposes a world of zero poverty, zero unemployment, and zero net carbon emissions. In his conception of social business, he thinks sustainability is crucial. So even at a very small scale, he would promote e-mobility schemes, for example, where if somebody's going to start a business, they would lower the consumption of fuels and carbon fuels, of one-off plastics, for example, things like that. So there's always tiny little things that can be done. I mean, there are very, very exciting projects in Latin America and in Africa in particular, in which microfinance is used for adaptation and mitigation. More mitigation than adaptation is being used for adaptation for climate resilient to smallholder farmers, for example. And there's very exciting projects going on.
With financial institutions and banks, they very often provide you with loans, but you don't get backup support. But the microcredit movement sometimes does more than just provide a loan. They do provide some sort of backup support and help for those people who are in impoverished situations. So what sort of support do they give?
No, absolutely, it's crucial. So there is so yes, absolutely, they get help. One of the biggest things that community development finance institutions in the UK, but also most microcredit providers do, is they provide a lot of flexibility with payments. So they recognize that the people that they are serving are people that are very, shocks happen to all of us, but these people have very little slack. And so there are payment holidays that are sometimes embedded into the microcredit contracts, and you can choose to pay or not pay. And if you use up all your holidays, you can always connect. It's very much people focused. So there'll be a credit officer that in the end becomes your friend, because you talk to them so often, and you can ask as much advice as you want. And then there is also the fact that they do not only provide financial services. A lot of CDFIs and also microcredit institutions around the world provide non-financial services, which could be, skills development of many things, business development services of many kinds, mentorship for your business, legal rights advice, and many others. I mean, there's plenty of non-financial services depending on the type of client that the microfinance institution serves.
One question that came from the audience in our meeting was how we can move forward on poverty, because the institutions in developed countries aren't always very strong. We don't have the infrastructure to tackle poverty. We have credit unions, but they always don't have, or often they don't have, the sort of financial backup, the money available at the scale needed to tackle the problem. So how do we move forward? How do we work together to try and solve this problem? Again, Olga explained.
It's not only the credit unions that you brought. We do a lot of research with people who are financially excluded. And one of the other things that you've brought about is the rotating credits and savings associations, which is that everyone puts money in a pot and the pot rotates. And that is informal, right? That is purely based on trust. But you cannot imagine how many people with funding that are using that just because benefit, even formally. So they even put the money into a bank account, but it's just like the benefit system is complicated. They will take away the benefits from you if they find that you have any extra income that they don't know where it comes from. Credit unions, not the credit unions that used to be or were created to be, I don't know. They are based on membership, and financially vulnerable people, let's face it, they are not members. They are not included. They have to build up savings before they can take up a loan. The amount of savings they need to build is too high. They have other needs that come up before they can actually build the level of savings. So they do not serve purpose anymore for the financially excluded. So I think the reply would be, again, community development finance institutions, but they are slowly disappearing because it's so expensive to give loans to people who are on the verge of financial exclusion, and they don't get the support from government, unfortunately, that credit unions are getting.
We had a follow-up question on credit unions, where one member there felt that credit unions could play a role and wondered why Olga thought there may be difficulties with that, in what way credit unions could be involved, and what structure needs to be set up with community groups like the ones we have in Enfield to achieve that.
Usually when credit unions do that, they do it as a partnership. I don't know if they're partnering with somebody, perhaps a housing association or some private, I don't know. But usually they do it as a pilot and a partnership. I don't know how advanced they are, but they can definitely do it. I mean, it's in the remit to do it. So I'm pleased to hear that they are finding solutions to kind of including these people into the financial system. So, very pleased to hear that it could work. It's just, I feel that some credit unions cannot make that effort, or it's not even that they don't want to, it's just that they cannot, because it's just so expensive that they would lower the funds too much and they won't be financially sustainable for the members. So I feel that these type of projects, like the one you're mentioning of the North London credit unions, they're great. And usually they are supported by other partners. And I think that's the way forward. Because let's face it, financial exclusion is a dimension of social exclusion, right? So there are other things that are happening. People are financially excluded, but not only. There is something else going on all the time. It might be homelessness, it might be, unstable jobs, it might be unemployment, it might be many other things. So I think that partnerships are the way forward, and in the way that you are actually discussing this as a local partnership within a borough, it's a very nice way of implementing a project of this kind, because you have all the community partners involved, and that usually works very well.
Clearly, it is a problem to help those people who are impoverished, because the very structure of our finance system in developed countries particularly are set up to only help those people who are credit worthy, and therefore it is difficult to give money to those people who really need it. And finally, Olga explained how difficult they can be.
But we were discussing about the making money and how the US and the UK credit scoring system make a lot of people financially excluded, right? And I think that's a perfect example of how you catalog lenders, your today buy now pay later, but before the doorstep lenders, and these are businesses that make huge amounts of money off people who are financially vulnerable. And yes, they end up being regulated by the FCA, but it always comes a little bit late when the profit is already a multi-millionaire business, and it's just So I absolutely agree. There's an industry behind it, and the financial services industry is big and powerful. So yeah.